Madam Chair, members, Ryan Sherman on behalf of Los Angeles County Professional Peace Officers, Long Beach Police Officers, Sacramento Deputy Sheriffs, and Fraternal Order of Police. We all remain opposed as well. I'd like to echo the comments made by my colleagues, also bring up a couple other issues. One is in the most recent amendment, which we appreciate the intent, where it's specific suspect description is exempted. We appreciate that. However, if it's a large group or something, it might apply only to an individual, so we're concerned about that. Also, like my colleague Mr. Lovell stated about the board, we're concerned there's not enough law enforcement representation on the board. If the goal is, as some of the advocates have said, to come together, it might make more sense to have a more balanced board instead of one that is so weighted away from law enforcement experts. And I'd also like to echo the comments about the perceived race issue. If we're really looking at trying to get the best and most accurate information, we might want to change the perceived to the actual and be allowed to ask these questions to provide the accurate data to the AG's office. So for those reasons and the others stated, we're opposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other speakers in opposition to the bill?
Yeah, Tim Yarian representing the Association for Los Angeles Deputy Sheriffs, Los Angeles Police Protective League, Riverside Sheriffs Association. We are opposed to the bill for the reasons that have been previously stated. I think the issue of racial profiling goes back a long ways, a long history. And I think Dr. Weber is trying to make a sincere effort to try to resolve the problems. I just think this is not the way to do it. It's too burdensome for rank and file officers, the officers themselves. And I applaud the idea of a board, but half the officers in California aren't even represented on this board. And so how are you going to come up with answers to problems when half the rank and file officers don't even have a say in what's going on? That isn't the right way to do it. We're not there yet with this bill. We continue to work with the offer to try to come up with a little better approach than we have now. So we urge you to vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Sean Rundle, California Peace Officers Association, a membership of over 2,000 law enforcement officers across the state of California, so for the reasons also stated in opposition.
Thank you. Are there other speakers in opposition to the bill? Seeing and hearing none, are there questions or comments from committee members? Senator Stone.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I really appreciate the testimony of some of the supporters that have faced, racial profiling and have had issues with public safety agencies in San Diego. As we all know, there's bad seeds in every profession: police, attorneys, politicians, pharmacists. And what I've seen over the past 6 months that I've been here is programs to better educate public safety officials on racial diversity and sensitivities. And here we're asking, in a very overly broad way, law enforcement to catalog every single stop, which I think is extremely burdensome, and to collect data on racial profiling. And in many cases, a police officer may not even know what the race of the person is. And so how, with all due respects, Senator Weber, how does one catalog something when they don't know the race of the person, because they can't ask them what the race of the person is, unless we're going to require them to start getting anthropology education to become a police officer now to try to guesstimate what the race is. How would we address that problem?
Racial profiling is not, racial profiling, first of all, is based on perception. People are stopped because they believe they are a certain type of individual, that they may not be, but the stop nonetheless occurs because you thought they were. It's not necessarily that you walk around with signs saying that I am African American. I don't need that sign. You know who I am. There may be others who are marginal, and you may not stop them. I have friends who look white who are never stopped, who are African American. The profiling occurs because of the perception that you have, not necessarily the information you get after the fact. So what we're looking at is people who are stopped because we perceive them to be a certain way. And that's what profiling is all about. And that becomes important. It's different if you give a report and everybody's ethnicity is there, and then you go after that individual after the fact. But we're talking about the perception that exists and causes an individual to be stopped for that reason. It's kind of like stopping a kid who has a car that's dropped to the ground and has a lot of noise. The assumption is, obviously, he's either gang member in trouble, may not be, but you stopped him because you thought he was, and that's the profiling that occurs. And that's one thing we have to understand. That's the problem that we have in terms of people's perception of individuals that are oftentimes inaccurate in terms of what that person is really all about. And that's what profiling is. And that's what we have existing in this city, this state, and this nation that we have seen on television very clearly. The most recent issue that happened in Baltimore where the young man's spine was broken and so forth and so on did not result in any way in any kind of criminal activity. But they thought he was probably a person who would do criminal activity because of where he was standing, what he looked like, and that's the profiling that we're talking about. Not the data you get after the fact that says, oh, now I know that you're white, that's why I stopped you. No, you stopped me for other reasons. Or now that I know that you're African American, that's why I stopped. No, you thought I was, and that's why you stopped me. Either I look like a person who shouldn't have been in that neighborhood, or I look like the person that you thought would be the kind of criminal element in that community, and as a result, you stopped me. The beginning of the stop is often the beginning of other kinds of things that occur that we see on television that we're sometimes abhorred by, because it's not always a criminal activity. So you ask, why were they stopped in the first place? Because they were profiled.
I appreciate your answer. It seems as though you're making the assumption that all these stops are racially motivated. I would opine that I don't think that they are.
No, I did not.
Okay, but let me ask you another question. So we have an officer that may work in, let's say, an African-American area, made 3 stops, African-Americans, had to chart it, goes to another crime, a very dangerous crime, and now that officer is going to have to decide in his mind, am I going to arrest this person on a felony, or is it going to look like that I am a racist? So in a way, it's, you know, your bill wants to encourage, your bill wants to encourage racial profiling at a time, I'm getting there, Madam Chair, if you just let me. Your bill seems to be emphasizing racism instead of de-emphasizing somebody's race when you're making a stop. And now you're requiring government, public safety officers, to document every case. I didn't see in your bill anywhere where you're going to be reimbursing local government the millions of dollars it's going to take to document every single stop. How do you plan on local governments to pay for this?
Probably they won't have as many lawsuits that they have to pay for. Who knows?
Yeah, well, you know, Madam Chair, I have some big problems with this bill. I think it's overly broad. I think at a time when we're working with public safety agencies to de-emphasize race, when we stop people, this is going to create, I think, more racism, and it's going to create a burden on all local public safety agencies in the state. And then the uniformity issue with the board, as we heard, half the police aren't even represented on this board. We're going to have officers that are going to be spending a majority of their time at their desks writing reports instead of being on the streets fighting crime. And for those reasons, I can't support the bill today.
Senator Glazer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Weber, thank you for bringing this issue to us today. And I certainly found the testimony from your witnesses to be very compelling and certainly sad for the effect it had on them and so many others. I had 2 questions to raise. One is, your bill defines stop as involving a search. It's not any time a police officer stops someone for a ticket or for some other reason, right? Is that correct, that the definition is only when a search is conducted?
Yes, the definition of a stop would include tickets and any investigatory interaction between a law enforcement officer and a member of the public.
So then, did I read the analysis incorrectly when it defines stop?
Perhaps you did.
I'm looking on page 4 of 9. It says, this bill defines stop for purposes of this section as any detention by a police officer in which the police officer conducts a search, including a consensual search of the person's body or property and the person's possessions or control.
And so any detention or any interaction with a member of the public that involves a search too, if there is not an actual detention. So for example, the things that would be included, pulling someone over for a ticket or stopping a pedestrian because you believe that he or she may be engaged in criminal activity. By contrast, if you're helping someone with roadside assistance, say a tree falls over and someone needs, there's a random interaction with a law enforcement officer and a member of the public, those types of interactions would not be included within the definition of a stop, and you wouldn't have to collect data on those types of interactions.
All right. And Dr. Weber, this is the kind of thing that obviously is totally unacceptable if it's happening. Certainly, the collection of data seems like a reasonable response to the concerns that have been raised. My question is not just unique to this issue, but to others as well. Have you any thoughts to putting a 10-year sunset on this to give it a good chance for the data to be collected and analyzed, and then for the matter to be reevaluated 10 years from now to see if it's still something that's required? Have you given any thought to that?
We haven't been asked to do that, but we would surely consider it, yes.
I think that not just on this issue, but there are many others in state government where I think we might be served by giving something a good chance to see if it's there, and certainly be something that I'd be supportive of.
Okay. I'm sure we can look into that and consider that as an amendment, yes.
Okay, are there other questions or comments from committee members? This really is a very important bill and a very sensitive topic. I think there are really two things that we're looking at today. One is the big picture in the United States of America and the state of California. And the other is the very particular things about this bill. Yeah, we're taking racial profiling very seriously now, post-Ferguson, post many of the events in the last few years. I would truly like to know, and it can be off, not in a hearing, but if there are specific proactive steps that have been taken by any of the organizations in opposition to the bill to deal with the perceived problem, which is the gulf of trust between law enforcement and the people that they serve. I would like to know what those are, because I think we need to recognize them and incorporate that experience into other legislation. But truly, if we don't build a partnership between law enforcement and the communities, we're in terrible trouble in our communities. And I appreciate the recognition of a lot of our frontline police officers of that situation and the steps that they're taking. I was impressed by the testimony from the gentleman from Connecticut, and I hope that we can all have copies of a description of what they do and any evaluation that was done on it, because I believe they say that they have an electronic handheld app, and it takes 10 seconds to fill it out when you make a stop. If that's the case, apps are pretty easy to get and pretty inexpensive, and I would hope that we would use any technology like that to minimize administrative burdens, which we definitely want to do. I'm certainly going to support the bill today. It's going forward to the Appropriations Committee. Again, I think looking at the concrete language and as the bill moves forward is really, really important, because we're trying to get something very good that won't have unintended consequences and won't have to be changed too much in the future, although the work of this committee is often tweaking legislation that we did in the past. About the board representation, I think that should be a topic of discussion. I would simply note that on almost every other board that I know, law enforcement dominates so completely that the community feels it has no voice. So this one, I think, is 5 out of 12 are directly from law enforcement. there may be other things you want to look at or balance out, but maybe we could get a template for many of the other state boards dealing with these issues that are set up. So I just want to commend the author really for the hard work, and the agencies that worked on it and the agencies that are still in opposition. I think that we have a lot of collaborative work that we need to do together, and this is a really good beginning, I think. Senator Monning?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also want to thank the author for bringing this forward. It's brought forward to address a problem, and I don't think anyone denies the problem. The chair articulated some of it. I do find some of the concerns raised by opponents to be issues that I hope we can continue to address. I think the self-reporting by an officer guessing what race or ethnicity is of a suspect or somebody who's subject to detention, I don't know if it exacerbates the problem where you would provide an option for the person to self-identify so that we get it right. There's lots of, within different ethnicities and races, Asian Pacific, for example, we're considering legislation that further seeks to define not just Asian Pacific, but is it Filipino, is it Laotian, is it Cambodian? Very different educational opportunities in those different subsets. So anyway, I would hope that would be something that could be looked at and pursued. I think on the record keeping and reporting, I'm sensitive to the concerns about so-called unfunded mandates. I do think it's important to recognize that in any stop that involves filing a police report, there's already a record-keeping requirement. So one question would become, how could you use existing formats, forms, computer systems that could be adapted where an officer, as part of the reports they spend hours filling out already, includes the ability to capture some of this information so that it's not a de novo starting from scratch approach. So again, I know different departments have different protocols, different forms, but something that could be as adaptable as possible to current record keeping, I would hope that could be explored as well. But I do think, I agree with the chair, if we can learn what's being done and being done in a manner that's involved collaboration in other jurisdictions, we should take the time to study that as well. But again, I hope there will be that commitment to work on this as it goes towards appropriation, because I think it can result in not only addressing some of the concerns, but strengthening what actually comes out of it in terms of data that's going to be helpful. So with that, I'm prepared to move the bill, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Monning. The motion is due pass to appropriations. Please read the roll. Oh. Assemblywoman Weber.
Yeah, I want to thank all of you for your comments and questions that are here with us today. Thank those who are even in opposition. We've spent a tremendous amount of time working with the law enforcement agencies, and we've made various adjustments and adaptations to the bill based on some of their concerns. And obviously, there still will always be concerns that we will not be able to address. We must recognize the fact that the first effort to change is awareness of the problem that you face, and understanding the depth of it and the amount of the concern is really very, very important. We can't continue to pretend that we don't know what racial profiling is, or that we don't have the data or know how large or how small the problem is. We need this information, as pointed out in Connecticut, so we can begin to target and understand the differences between the urban and the rural areas and areas of racial profiling, understand what kinds of things are occurring, and basically present the information to our officers and our agencies so they can understand and begin to address the issue that's there. It is an age-old problem. It has become obviously national and international because everybody has a cell phone now and is recording the information. But if you're raised in a community of color, in a community of challenge, racial profiling is older than I am. It was the life of my father, my uncles, my brother, my grandfather, and everyone else knew what happened when you were stopped by the police. The level of distrust was there. It was always their word against your word, and so therefore it was never brought to light as we have it today. It becomes extremely important that we respond to it in California, that we take the lead, and that we prevent some of the things that we see happening around the nation that have happened to basically get it under control. The interesting thing is we do have an example in Connecticut. We have an example of what happened when they did do the data collection, that it did not turn out to be so overly burdensome. They found some ways to do it effectively, and we do have some collection of data in California that's just not mandated statewide. And so we really have to get a handle on this before it actually gets a handle on us. I consistently hear the term that this whole issue of it is burdensome. I can tell you as an African American, racial profiling itself is burdensome to mothers, to children, to when your child leaves your house. It is truly a burden on your heart and your conscience to wonder what will happen if they get stopped by the police. I've had my son stopped. My husband was stopped when he was a lawyer. And in fact, 7 lawyers were stopped at once because they thought they were all criminals because they were running down the street in the rain. And they all got stopped, only to discover that one of them was a judge and all of them carried bar cards. But they were all African American. So the issue of racial profiling is a thing that we live with every day. And fortunately today we have the opportunity to begin to address it in a way in which we collect the data, learn from our experiences, and improve our relationships in communities. I respectfully ask for your aye vote for 953.
Thank you. Please read the roll.
Hancock.
Aye.
Hancock, aye. Glazer. Glazer, aye. Leno. Liu. Liu, aye. Monning. Monning, aye. Stone.
The bill has enough votes to pass. I'll hold the roll open for the
Thank you
absent
very much
members.
for your support.